I am sad to confess that I was not much of an older brother, as I have noted earlier. The expression on my face in this 1947 picture probably says more than my humble words can explain. Somehow, I saw myself in a mystical zero-sum game with Steve. Any affection that he got reduced the amount going to me. However, as I also stated above, the year we spent at 975 Park Avenue was a very happy time. Before the new car, Dad took the train to Newark. With the new car he could drive, and so he became a highway commuter. I should say here that Dad loved to drive. Going anywhere, even work, was a real thrill for him. I cannot remember ever being in one of his early cars with Mom, or any other potential driver, where Dad was not behind the wheel. A pattern was now set, which was to repeat itself for all of the years he worked. He would leave the house at 8 a.m. and return at 6:30 p.m. In the early years, he had to work one Saturday out of 3 or 4, and always one night a week. But that was small change. While we lived with Bert and Selma, dinner was a rather formal affair that included me at the table. Selma always made dinner each night. This was a tradition I have carried on in my own household. But, as you will learn later, Bill and Lee had other routines. One small memory I retain from Selma's table was the serving of chicken or turkey. The bird or birds always came to the table whole. Bert did the carving. He had poultry shears that he used to disassemble the fowl. I retain that tool to this day, although I have rarely used it. The picture of Bert, dressed in a suit, readying the dinner, was something that looked like an escapee from a Norman Rockwell painting. Like sailing, skiing was another Schuldenfrei family activity. Before I started this project, I had believed that my first exposure to the boards was when I was 7 years old. However, the picture you are viewing had a date of 1947, so I was about 5 when this was taken. Note the one-piece snowsuit and the bamboo ski poles. I doubt that I was doing much downhill at this time the image was made. As you will see later, Mom and Dad went off for a week of skiing almost every year. Steve and I were left behind until the early 1950s. The quality of the skiing was not too much to write home about. Dad had learned to ski at Dartmouth College. Since ski lifts were a rare commodity in those years, 1927 to 1931, everybody did what today would be called cross-country skiing. Dad told the story of a trip to Mount Tremblant in Quebec. He spent the whole day climbing the mountain with his skis on his back for one late afternoon run from the top. Dad was the master of the telemark turn that is used with a free heel cable ski binding. Later on, when even cable ski bindings held your heel fixed down on the ski, he shifted his technique to the Christiana turn, the forerunner of today's stem Christie. These turns were very hard on the human knee, such that Dad had all but given up skiing at age 50. As I write this narrative in 2009, I am still skiing at age 66. What a difference the parallel turn makes. During the summer of 1948, my folks drove to the coast of Maine, to a resort just south of Brunswick. They, together with Dad's brother Joe and his wife Ruth, spent a week at a hotel on the shore called Sebasco. Interestingly, Sebasco is still going strong as I write this narrative during the summer of 2009. It is, of course, not the rustic accommodations it was in the late 1940s. Dad's brother was always called Buddy by friends and family alike. He lived in a house on the next street over, and Steve and I played with his son David for many years. David lives today in Florida too, but in Fort Myers on the west coast of the state. The picture is interesting because Mom is wearing a jacket while Buddy and Ruth are not. She was always cold, and believing the world was like herself, forced Steve and I to bundle up to do battle against global cooling, regardless of the season. The coast of Maine always held a source of endless fascination for Dad. As you will find out later in this biography, whenever they visited us in summer camp in Winthrop, Maine, they always routed their return to New Jersey via the Maine coast. Dad had an old college buddy, Elliot Peanuts Winslow, who ran a tour boat in Boothbay Harbor. The boat, Argo, was built in 1944. While Peanuts is long gone, the Argo is not. You can still tour Boothbay just the way Mom and Dad did on the same boat. This picture of Bert, Selma, Steve, and me was taken just outside our new home at 730 Sherman Avenue in the early fall of 1948. Mom got the house of her dreams. It was a center entrance colonial built as a pre-war development. The house in the background was our next-door neighbor, Old Man Beekman. It is an exact carbon copy of our house, so you can get some idea of what the old homestead looked like. The property had 12 oak trees on less than a quarter acre, so it was always shady and had plenty of leaves to rake in the fall. Dad was the furniture buyer for Bamberger's, so the home furnishings were always top shelf. It was done in the Chippendale style with mahogany furniture from the Kraft House in Williamsburg, Virginia. Mom set an elegant table, and that dining room table is my dining room table yet today. By moving out of Selma's house, Mother could no longer depend on Bert for transportation, so they bought a second car for her. It was a used Dodge that transported Steve and I hither and yon. As you can see, the upwardly mobile executive now had a house in the suburbs, 2 children, and a couple of cars. We were firmly ensconced in the upper middle class. The more we get into this narrative, the more these images will be vacation shots. As the earlier picture of me demonstrates, winter trips often involve skiing. In 1949, Mom and Dad hit the slopes of New England, and Steve and I had to make do with staying at home. The first picture shows a group of skiers at the top of Cannon Mountain in Franconia Notch, New Hampshire. I cannot identify the people in this group, but I do know Cannon well. It does not look cold in this view, but that mountain has some of the coldest, wind-whipped environments of any place I have ever skied. Added to the nasty weather is some of the steepest, narrowest, and iciest skiing in all of North America. Dad was in his element. As an interesting footnote to Cannon Mountain, Steve was to buy a ski lodge not far from there. Mother, on the other hand, was a fair-weather skier. Here she is at Bromley, Vermont. It was interesting to note that in those days it was called Big Bromley. By the standards of today, it should have been called Little Bromley. You should also note that there was no grooming on the trails in those days. But one of Bromley's biggest assets, as far as Mom was concerned, was its southern exposure. This made for fewer days of skiing, but far more comfortable days. This stands in stark contrast to the aforementioned Cannon Mountain. I'm sure that after a couple of days there, the move to Bromley was most appreciated by all but Dad. 1949 had a summer vacation too, sans the children. This time the folks were off to Canada Lake, New York. Judging from the picture, this was another rustic summer camp for adults. I have located Canada Lake on the map in central New York, north of Canajoharie, for those of you who are familiar with upstate geography. There is no reference to the resort on the slide, so I doubt if the cabin illustrated still survives. I can identify 2 people in the photograph. One, of course, is Mom. The man third from the right was Howie Sadwith. Howie was an old friend of Dad's from Plainfield, New Jersey. You will note the golf clubs in the picture. Here was another opportunity lost for Dad to enjoy some time on the links, and so passed June of 1949. During the 1950s, our family often took ski trips to Woodbound Inn in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. This picture of Dad in 1950 was the only trip that I was left behind. In later segments, I will describe these skiing adventures from my own memory. Since I was not along on this outing, let me tell you something about the inn. Woodbound Inn still exists as a family business, but it is not the place that I remembered, as the current owners are not the Brummer family. Ed Brummer was another Dartmouth classmate of Dad's. He was manager of the property from 1930 until he bought the place and renamed it Woodbound Inn in 1934. The clients of the inn were mostly the Dartmouth college buddies. The same people came back year after year. It was not for the skiing, which was a modest hill with 2 rope tows, but for the party life Ed brought to the table. After skiing at the overly sized, even by today's standards, Cannon Mountain, Woodbound Inn's slope was a molehill. But for the week-long party, which was the life at the inn, it could not be